सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Fingers curled around the handles of their famous two-handed steel and carbon swords. Others equipped with nothing but bodies hardened by years of martial arts training. The men of Lieutenant General Song Shehan's 29th Corps made their way along the woodcutters' trails below the Great Wall of China. For 2 days they had been fighting medieval-style melees with Imperial Japan's forces on the wall's ramparts and fortified gateways. Now General Song was preparing to take death into the enemy camp. The men of the 29th Corps, historian Jiashun Du has recorded, slaughtered the Japanese soldiers in their beds, destroyed artillery guns, and set up ammunition dumps on fire. Then, as morning broke on the 3rd of January 1933, the Chinese disappeared into the morning mist. For the very last time in history, the Great Wall of China, left in disrepair since the Manchu invasion breached it in 1644, had defended the motherland. Hamas's easy defeat of Israel's so-called Iron Wall with Gaza, twin lines of 6-meter high barbed wire fences made from 140,000 tons of iron and steel, backed up with an underground concrete skirt to block tunnels and a dense array of radar, thermal cameras, movement sensors, and remotely operated machine guns, has set military planners across the world wondering if modern static defenses are again as useless as the great walls which guarded medieval empires. For decades after the Second World War, static defenses, like the supposedly impervious Maginot Line breached by Germany in 1940 or the Atlantic Wall pulverized by the Allies in 1944, seemed a folly of history. Today though, walls form an important part of border defenses around the world, from the southwestern borders of the United States to India's frontiers in Kashmir and Bangladesh. Though India is testing a smart fence in Kashmir, using government sources, say sensors from Magal, which also developed the systems in Gaza and the United States, problems with infiltration remain. In recent weeks, as we've discussed, jihadist units have shown the ability to penetrate the fence, strike and exfiltrate their personnel. Fencing of the line of control and the introduction of technologies like thermal imaging and ground movement sensors do not appear to have a clear correlation with terrorist infiltration, official data shows. So do walls work or not? Hamas's ability to overwhelm the Gaza fence poses a stark question. Do these multi-million-dollar fences really work? France's long murderous counterinsurgency campaign in Algeria holds the key to understanding how border fences were reborn after their Second World War failures. Even with air support and a naval blockade and some unsubtle arm twisting of the governments of neighboring Tunisia and Morocco, French forces had little luck interdicting Front de Libération Nationale or FLN fighters and equipment. There was reluctance to mine the border since insurgents in Vietnam had shown the French that they were pretty skilled in digging out those mines and using them against the French military. Lacking other options, France strung out a fence, but it wasn't a great success. In 1956, the US military officer Timothy Bairstow records, the FLN removed a 5-kilometer stretch of the fence and tauntingly left behind a page from a French military manual which read, I quote, "Any obstacle not covered by fire is ineffective." The final French fence, called the Maurice Line, proved a formidable obstacle though. Electrified with a 5,000 volt charge, powered by stations put up every 15 to 20 kilometers, the Maurice line was also defended by modified naval surveillance radar which caught any movement. The French improved their reaction time to breaches by building roads and using airborne forces. FLN infiltration was reduced to tiny groups which could just be pinpricks against the French. Elsewhere in the world, it's important to note, similar efforts didn't always work out. The Rhodesian counterinsurgency's cordon sanitaire, scholar Martin Rupier notes, failed because the government lacked enough troops to effectively patrol it. Zimbabwean insurgents were able to clear the minefields of the cordon sanitaire using spades in just 2 hours. False alerts from early warning systems caused by weather conditions and mud contributed to the system's ineffectiveness. Forts, electronic sensors, and airborne surveillance were extensively used by the US military to monitor the movements of insurgents as well as traffickers across Iraq's borders with Syria and Iran. The effort, expert Robert Bateman notes, was shackled from the outset by the fact that the US could never build up the necessary density of troops to respond to electronic intelligence. The costs of this turned out to be brutal as the Islamic State overwhelmed large parts of the territory after 2006. The lesson from Algeria to Iraq was simple. Even though fences could be a useful tool in securing borders, there was no tech fix to the problem of getting enough well-trained troops on the ground. Left unmanned, even the most lethal minefields and fences could be penetrated. From the evidence available so far, Israel forgot that lesson, in part because of the ideological priorities of its political leadership. 3 entire battalions of soldiers, journalist Gershom Gorenberg has revealed, were moved to the West Bank on October the 4th, that's just before the Hamas attack, only to protect a convoy of Jewish worshippers to St. Joseph's Tomb in Nablus, a contested religious site. Even larger number of troops were thinned from Gaza and frittered away in small pockets guarding settlements in the West Bank. The Knesset's powerful Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, Gorenberg reports, did not hold a single meeting on Gaza in the year up to the strike, devoting its sessions instead to the issue of how settlements could be protected as well as the roads between them. But that wasn't the whole problem. Hamas learnt lessons from what it had been seeing. Hamas began by bombarding Israeli observation posts and remote control machine guns with drones, built on cheap, easily available commercial platforms. Even as Israeli command posts were blinded by these first attacks, Hamas blew apart the fence with Bangalore torpedoes. Those are simple pipes filled with explosives pushed under the fence. It rolled bulldozers through the gaps. As the scholar Franz-Stefan Gadi has argued, Israel became victim to a tech fetish, imagining devices could substitute for soldiers who were trained and prepared to fight wars. There was an important second lesson too. Enemies constantly learn lessons from reverses and find ways to overcome their adversaries. Warfare is dynamic, and Hamas had proved a good student of Israeli success. The most fundamental problem with the Gaza fence and others like it is that there's no clear metrics for judging just how well it works. 5 years after former US President Donald Trump's anti-immigrant wall began going up on the country's southwestern border, the Department of Homeland Security conducted studies that gave some idea of what the wall had achieved. The number of so-called gotaways, that is, the number of subjects who, after making an unlawful entry, are not turned back or apprehended, as defined by the DHS, rose from 85,505 in 2011 to 389,155 in 2021. Now that could be because the total number of people trying to cross had gone up dramatically. It could be because the fence wasn't working so well. The number of successful turnbacks or potential migrants the DHS stopped also rose, but far more modestly, from 121,000 or so to 174,320 in 2021. Few statistical studies of the kind conducted by the DHS, and it only did it after prolonged prodding from the state auditor, the Government Accountability Office, have been conducted elsewhere in the world. The DHS knew how many people it was arresting, but had no estimates of how many were evading its elaborate border defenses. This is a problem across the world, and it's made assessment of the effectiveness of fencing and sensors almost impossible. Ever since the 1940s, when the United States first began fencing the southwestern border to cut back on illegal immigration, little evidence emerged that the strategy was actually very useful. Efforts to close the border in 1969 and 1985 came to nothing. Former President Ronald Reagan, who presided over the second closure of the border, had earlier suggested that, and I quote, rather than talking about putting up a fence, why don't we work out some recognition of our mutual problems and make it possible for them to come here legally with a work permit? You see, Reagan understood that the answer to the problem might not be the obvious one of trying to block migrants. Even as Trump spent billions of dollars on expanding the high-tech wall, a policy that's continued under President Joe Biden, traffickers applied private sector ingenuity to circumvent these defenses. The methods in use today range from ladders and tunnels to devices which actually allow four-wheel drive vehicles to climb over the border wall, believe it or not. Trafficking cartels use everything from catapults to drones which can probe for gaps in the movement of border patrols. Trained terrorists, of course, have little difficulty in circumventing obstacles that don't deter drug traffickers or even illegal immigrants. As early as 2018, arrested Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorist Zabiullah Saqib told Indian interrogators that it took his unit of 6 jihadists just 30 minutes to penetrate the coils of concertina wire piled up on the line of control. Large parts of the Kashmir LOC fence are also damaged by heavy snowfall each winter, which creates gaps that physically can't be repaired until quite late in the spring. Learning from the experience of Israel, India needs to be ready for the prospect that terrorists will always be looking for new ways to test its preparedness on the line of control. The jihadist resurgence in Pakistan's northwest could, for example, lead to India confronting large groups of well-trained insurgents rather than just small unit infiltration. Technology cannot substitute for the training and preparedness that allow resilience in the face of surprise. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm the contributing editor at ThePrint. Thank you for watching Security Code.